Boldwood presents Who Do You Think You Are, Maggie Pink? Written by Janet Hoggarth and read by Julie Maisie. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. She wants to breastfeed, Fiona snapped at the midwife. Why won't you let her? She's not the baby's mother. Of course she is. This baby's going to the nursery. A nurse'll give her a bottle. Let Morag do the bottle. Bone weary, I gazed down at Shona, swaddled in a scratchy towel, her perfect rosebud mouth pursed, blowing me a kiss, eyes squeezed shut like a sleeping mouse. They hadn't wanted me to hold her, but Fiona had forced them. They said I was shivering too much, I might drop her. I'll sit right there. She won't drop her, Fiona had said calmly. I'd never witnessed this side of my sister before. She toed the line, crossed her T's and dotted her I's, didn't step on the pavement cracks, and never ever challenged the status quo. She wasn't a pushover, she just did what was expected. But not today. In lieu of a maternal figure, she had stepped into the shoes and admirably filled them. She's just been through birth. If you won't let her hold her baby, you're animals. The older midwife had practically had steam blasting out of her ears and puffed up her chest to reply, but the younger-looking one had touched her arm, a warning gesture. I'd like to give her a bottle, please. I drew on the last breath of fire in my belly. I'm not going to see her again. It's the least you can do. 5 minutes later, after barely checking I was in one piece, the old bitch of a midwife thrust a bottle in my face, no demonstration of how to encourage Shona to latch on, the term I had gleaned from the library book Rita had borrowed for me. You'd better hurry up. She needs to have a bath and go to the nursery. This room needs cleaning. The younger midwife had already been called away to another berth, the yelling echoing down the hallway outside. Fine, we'll sit in the corridor, Fiona spat at her. Don't mind that she's 15, scared, and has no idea what she's doing or feeling. You get your bloody shaken back out. She can't take that baby anywhere. Then give us 5 minutes. Fiona stood up, like a boxer itching to start the fight. If she had gloves on, she would have been tapping them together in anticipation. 5 minutes. The midwife left, no doubt checking her watch so as not to give us a minute more. Quick, get your boob out, Fiona instructed. What? Breastfeed while she's not here? Give me that. I handed her the bottle and she put it on the floor. I brought this too. She pulled a yellow blankie out of her handbag. Should we wrap her? While I fumbled with the hospital gown, wearing a bulky sanitary pad harness under paper pants, Fiona clumsily wrapped Shona over the top of the towel in the blankie she had knitted for her. She looked like a plump sausage roll from Ruby's Bakery in Tain. What do I do? I hissed. I can't remember anything from those books. My brain's not right. There's nothing wrong with your brain. You're just exhausted, Fiona said. I read that the earlier you get them to latch on, the better. Something about the initial milk having more goodness in it. Put her on your nipple. Any other time, this would have been excruciating and hilarious. My sister prodding my boobs with her bare hands. We hadn't seen each other starkers since we'd been wee nippers, and all of a sudden she'd seen me wide open, naked, giving birth, my body public property, a birthing machine. She caught my eye and laughed. Sorry, I think she needs to sniff your milk. I read that in a book too. It's like bloody David Attenborough. But I did as she said. Shona roused slightly from her post-birth slumber, eyes still closed, her mouth opening like a baby bird. Shove her on, Fiona cried. Shona couldn't latch on and started greeting. Squeaks, really. Here, squeeze your nipple. See if anything comes out. Jesus, Fiona, I'm not a bloody cow. Do you want to feed her or not? Aye. I squeezed with my thumb and forefinger, and a blob of fluid appeared like glistening mercury in a school science experiment. I tried Shona again, and this time she attached herself and started sucking. "You did it! How does it feel?" Fiona asked. "Odd, tickly, stingy." I stroked Shona's head while she fed. She kept falling asleep, and I had to blow on her face several times, startling her. Fiona got her camera out. "No, not while she's feeding. After." Both of us stared in disbelief at Shona, like we'd just spotted J.R. Ewing in the co-op buying milk. Only yesterday she'd been wedged inside me. "We could run away with her," Fiona said desperately. "I could get a job to support us." "You Wally, you need to finish college." "I could do it after, when she's older." "What if we get caught? How will we leave the hospital? Where will we go?" More than anything in the world, I wanted to agree to this daft plan. "You've no money. I've none. We're buggered." "I could tell Da, and he could send us cash behind Moore's back." The more she travelled into the fantasy future, the less real it felt. "We could rent a cottage near Loch Ness. Remember, you've always loved it there, especially in the winter when the trees are bare and the tourists have trickled away. I could work in the visitor centre or a cafe. Then you could work there too when she's at school." I looked at my sister, tears silently sliding down her cheeks. "Yes, I could work shifts, and we could take it in turns picking her up from school. Do you think she'd like going to gymnastics after, like you used to? Or guitar lessons, like me?" I grabbed her hand, and she squeezed it hard. "Maybe she'll like something different, that's just for her." Fiona kissed Shona's head as the door opened, and the fantasy burst all over us. "You've actually had 6 minutes," the midwife said, then noticed what was going on. "What did I say? The bottle only." She strode towards me, and for one crazed moment, I thought she was going to wallop me across the soulless room. "Give her to me." "She's still feeding," I replied, cradling her head, protecting her. "She can go on to a bottle now. Hand her over." 2 minutes, Fiona bartered. "You've got 1. You two'll be the death of me." When my time was up, Shona was asleep again, and I tightened my grip. The midwife bent down to take her, but I wouldn't surrender my precious daughter. She sighed heavily, glancing at me, her eyes holding my gaze for longer than necessary. "I've a granddaughter your age. Do myself a mischief if this was her. Tell you what, I'll put her in the nursery with a name tag on, near the door, make it easy for you to see her." "I don't want her to go," I cried, my heart flooded with panic. "You can see her in the nursery, I promise. She isn't going anywhere for a while. I'll keep her in the shawl." She attempted to prise my fingers from around the blanket, but I just held on. "Listen, Hen, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. I don't think you want the hard way, do you?" "We'll see her in the nursery," Fiona cajoled me. "Won't we? We'll go visit, take pictures." "Aye, she'll be waiting for you in there, all clean like a new penny. Maybe you can give her another bottle." I looked at the midwife, now on her knees in front of me, her mascara flaking onto her blotchy cheeks, the powder worn away. "What's the hard way?" I sobbed. "It can't be harder than this." "Just give me the baby, Hen. Rip that plaster off." I let my body go limp and howled like a wounded animal. The midwife swept Shona up from my lap and headed to the door, turning before she left. "I've set you up in a private room. Stacey will be here in a minute to take you." "So, the old bitch has a heart?" Fiona whispered, as I collapsed into her arms, my left breast leaking milk onto my gown. Chapter 1. Margaret Pink, Maggie for short, was 43 and well aware she could have survived the blitz saddled with that moniker. She'd Googled name change deed poll 1 trillion times before she'd reached 21, but gently grew into the name Maggie, like it was a pair of school shoes, presciently bought a size too big, safe in the knowledge she would eventually fill them. Her gradual acceptance was also aided and abetted by The Simpsons, a programme her parents didn't approve of, but appreciated children might enjoy, even if the English spoken didn't resemble their boomer comedic favourites, Monty Python or Fawlty Towers. Her parents had always been old, as far as Maggie could remember. They'd been lawyers dealing with dull local disputes, party wall wranglings and personal injury claims. The most thrilling case ever to embroil them was Totty versus Cadbury. Kevin Totty, a selection box line worker, almost lost his hand in an unfortunate wrapping incident at the Hoylake milk tray factory. Pinks made the front of the Liverpool Echo when they succeeded to win their client a generous out-of-court settlement. Maggie had no idea you could put a price on 2 fingers and a thumb tip. Apparently enough for Kevin, forever known as Cadbury's Fingers, to live his best life in a footballer's mansion in Caldy. Even after the infamous victory, Maggie couldn't be lured to the dizzy heights of malpractice suits and lost income claims due to wonky paving slabs. Mum and Dad had promised her the office with its own hand basin next to the kitchen. Not even that luxury was enough. So when she graduated with her law degree, she immediately escaped to the bright lights of London like a character in a Beatles song. Callow and sheltered though she was, Maggie was concrete in her conviction that the legal world was not for her. What on earth she actually wanted was less certain. The one thing that she'd really loved hadn't been overly encouraged, finding itself consigned to the back burner. Of course, her parents humoured her with singing lessons and supported her through choir practice, both immensely proud when she was chosen to sing the Christmas Carol solo at Liverpool Cathedral for the district school service. However, they made it abundantly clear only a select few made a real living from singing. Why not pursue it as a hobby? There's always law. The practice can be yours one day. Meanwhile, Nisha, her best friend from home, had offered Maggie the spare room in her poky Camberwell flat. No other medical students would take it. Maggie sold it to herself that she was getting unparalleled life experience in one of the most exciting and expensive cities on the planet, while she decided what to do for the rest of her existence. In reality, she hardly saw Nisha, and the box room she sublet had been an airing cupboard in a previous life, the pipes not rerouted, so turning over in bed could result in third-degree burns. And to add insult to injury, the rent ate up most of Maggie's waitressing wages. The lure of law and the safety net of living at home while she qualified almost claimed her. The day before she was going to throw in the towel, Nisha had rescued her from party wall oblivion by dragging her out to a bash at a karaoke bar in town. 1 bottle of Merlot in, Maggie wowed Eva, the birthday girl, with a rendition of Get the Party Started, waking the following morning with a grade 4 hangover, a pipe burn on her foot, and a shoe-in of an interview at a city-based marketing firm. Who said you couldn't make money from singing? The majority of Maggie's first day at Foster and Aidan was spent fielding questions about her northern accent and lineage, rather than finding out which was the temperamental photocopier and what director to avoid in the lift. "So, you're from Liverpool," everyone had crowed after each introduction as soon as she'd opened her mouth. A crass impersonation of her vocal calling card had swiftly followed, with these theatrical flourishes varying in accuracy from offensive to downright racist. Maggie soon grew tired of explaining she was, in fact, from the Wirral, and just nodded along when they mentioned the Beatles and the defunct TV soap Brookside. The Wirral was posh Liverpool, but not actual Liverpool. A cheap ferry ride across the River Mersey, where all the footballers live. That fact alone should have been enough to pinpoint its whereabouts, though not many had heard of it at her fancy new London job, being south of Watford Gap services. Maggie wasn't even from the Wirral. She was technically Scottish, but that complication wasn't something she talked about. As she deliberated whether to apply her usual eye makeup, Maggie reflected on her impetuous flight from West Kirby 20 years ago. Where would she be now if she'd not accepted that job at Foster & Aidan? Deciding against mascara, Maggie smudged her lips with reliable pillow talk and blotted. Even if she'd remained in West Kirby, nothing could change where she found herself right now. Today was the funeral of Iris Pink, her mum. Maggie couldn't muster the appropriate breast-beating anguish in keeping with the death of a parent, and for that she was riddled with guilt. Of course she was devastated, but the sadness was being power-hosed to smithereens by the undulating excitement and expectation of what was going to happen next. Maggie was about to discover who she really was. But first she had to stand graveside in her Zara black dress and sunglasses and dutifully wave Iris off on her journey to reunite with Jonathan, her husband and Maggie's dad, who had died 5 years previously. Of course she cried, her pinky grazing Adam's thumb as he tried and failed to clasp her hand, either for show or for himself. Roxie stood next to him, typically avoiding any contact with her mother. Maggie stole a look at her in her navy H&M tea dress and Doc Martens, hastily cleaned with a makeup wipe just before the hearse had arrived. Roxie was trying not to cry, her knuckles yellow starbursts from the effort of squeezing them to keep the tears at bay. Roxie never cried, unless Adam did, and then it was like the rivers of Babylon. Her dad, always her weak spot. Returning to her childhood home, where her past and future pulsed away in the back office, Maggie did the rounds, offering platters of Marks and Spencer's finest. She politely talked to neighbours, including beloved Mr. May and Harriet, the Granger family, the new owners of Pink Solicitors, Nisha and her mum, Hema. Her much older cousins lived in Canada and hadn't flown over. If Mum and Dad had conveniently arranged to die at the same time, they would have coughed up for the flights. When everyone had finally drifted off, leaving a graveyard of egg and cress, and Adam and Roxie were stationed in front of the TV, catching up on one of their interminable box sets, Maggie crept up the stairs. She stood hesitantly outside the Home Office, where her parents had stashed all her glowing school reports, graduation certificate, every single school photo with varying degrees of wonky bowl cuts, childhood drawings, a total curation of their love and hope for her, their only daughter. She touched the familiar brass doorknob and breathed in the opposing smells of the house, polish and dust. This was it. The moment she had been unconsciously waiting for her whole adult life. Her heart throbbed in her throat as she opened the door. Chapter 2. The office was half empty, the shelves swept of books. The few Maggie had filched were stashed in the boot of her car, the rest living out their days at the cancer research shop, along with a forest of knickknacks and bags of clothes, soon to be catnip to hipsters everywhere. Maggie had refrained from delving into the filing cabinet before now. It felt like a huge betrayal while Iris was above ground, like her comatose soul would rally the minute she opened the drawer. Infuriated, Maggie hadn't the manners to wait until she'd logged off. However, in reality, Maggie had actually invented that reason for leaving it until now, not wishing to unpack the myriad motives and emotions attached to an occasion like this. Iris and Jonathan had always been very open with Maggie about the fact she was adopted, and it was brought up periodically in conversations throughout her life. The last time had been before her mum had got sick. Iris had mentioned on the phone that Inverness had been in the news that day, a world record for the largest haggis having just been broken there. I wish I'd tried proper haggis when we came to collect you. It's supposed to be better than the ones in Morrison's. Maggie had suggested trying McAndrew and Sons in West Kirby next time she had a penchant for haggis. She was sure they'd knock one up for her. Maggie had been in West Kirby, working from home, since the call from Sheltering Arms nursing home over 2 weeks ago. I'm sorry, Maggie. She's probably got 48 hours at the most. I'd get here as soon as you can. Even though it was expected, the call was still a shock and represented the culmination of toing and froing up the motorway every 2 weeks. Maggie had sat with her mum until she died, holding her papery hand, returning to the empty house and an M&S microwave meal for one that was still there at breakfast. Maggie couldn't admit it was a relief when she eventually died, but she hadn't seen Iris Pink since she went missing in action 6 months previously, gradually drowning under a sea of diamorphine. Like the tortoise, the cancer had finally overtaken the dozing hare. Maggie knelt down and dragged open the grey metal cabinet, everything arranged in impeccable alphabetical order, naturally. She pulled out the file that read Margaret Adoption in her mum's sloping script. She could still recall the day they'd told her, like it had happened 5 minutes ago. Other childhood memories had faded into ghosts of days out and generic holidays by the sea. This one remained in sharp focus. Margaret, we have something to tell you. Maggie had been wearing a red puffball skirt, reluctantly allowed for her 6th birthday. They were ubiquitous, vile marshmallow creations, a skirt and a cushion rolled into one. She could remember sitting on the chocolate-brown sofa in the living room, the plush velvet tickling the back of her legs, and that she'd eaten egg sandwiches for lunch with Walker's roast chicken crisps. She'd been looking through her mum's Life Goes to the Movies, her favourite go-to book ahead of a Barbie marathon. It was a cumbersome, hardback coffee table book depicting the lives and films of movie stars long past their sell-by date. Marilyn Monroe, Marlon Brando, Cary Grant, Paul Newman, and many more cohorts. Maggie had loved turning the outsized pages, almost as big as her, and pressing her nose against the glossy paper, inhaling the almondy vanilla smell. She adored the glamour and pored over the old-fashioned dresses and behind-the-scenes pictures, searching for inspiration for a particularly meaty Barbie storyline to act out with Nisha. Her dad had opened the conversation while her mum stretched it out like one of Jimmy Stewart's famous monologues. You know that we love you very much, and that all we want is the best for you. Peculiar words for a 6-year-old to receive, but her parents were used to dealing with adults. She remembered wondering when she could go out and play with Nisha, because she had a new Barbie, and they were going to introduce her to her Sophia Loren Barbie, and possibly Ken, Rock Hudson, if Maggie could find his checked slacks. Iris called them that. Mummy and I need you to know that we weren't your first Mummy and Daddy. Which was a bit of a surprise. Where are they? Well, your first Mummy is in Scotland, where we adopted you. What's adopted? It means we took you home, and you became our daughter. Why? Because we wanted to have a child to look after and care for. Where's my first daddy? We don't know. Your first Mummy didn't say. Have you met my first Mummy? No, we know her name, but we never met her. Her name is Morag. Why didn't she want me? There had been a long pause after that question. She was too young to look after you properly, so we helped. Can I show her Sophia Loren Barbie? Maybe one day. Can I play with Nisha now?" Morag had been steamrollered in favour of Barbie. In Maggie's young eyes, it was a worthy put-down, not able to articulate the slight at having been so heavily rejected. "Can Morag ever find me?" she asked her mum one wet Sunday afternoon when she was about 10. She'd been watching Annie, and it had sparked an avalanche of anxiety. Eponymous heroine Annie had been dragged from Daddy Warbuck's mansion by her real parents, away from her charmed life. "Your adoption was closed," her mum had explained. "That means Morag doesn't know who adopted you, or where you live. She has no way of contacting you. But if you want to trace her once you reach 18, you are allowed. Her details may be on file if she wants to be found. We've been sending a yearly photo to the agency, as agreed, but all she knows is your first name." Maggie swung between total curiosity and complete and utter contempt for being carelessly thrown away like a broken toy. If she thought about Morag, especially when the teenage years hit, she tried to imagine giving away something she cherished. Snoopy, circa 1986, who followed her to university and beyond, still rammed under her pillow to this day, minus eyes and ears. Maybe Morag had never loved her. And when she'd reached 15, the age she'd learned Morag had been when she was born, the thought of being a mum seemed so far out of reach that Maggie kind of sympathised. Morag wouldn't have been able to go to discos, snog boys, buy clothes, have parties. She would have been looking after her. Not that Maggie was living the wild party life of an American teenage movie heroine, but it was nice to have aspirations. As she approached adulthood, she realised Iris and Jonathan had not arrived at adoption via a smooth path. The fact that they had reached as far as Scotland in order to procure her spoke volumes. To safely preserve her cosy family in Aspic, Maggie decided she'd leave Pandora's box unopened then. However, she was curious. From an early age, Maggie had been plagued by a constant sense of otherness. As well as her innate musicality, over the years another quiddity sprouted from nowhere. Iris and Jonathan sat at the sensible end of life's varied spectrum. Brown sofas, beige walls, practical shoes, taking their teeth out before bed. They had not abided by superstitions. Both parents could easily ignore a single magpie, happily open an umbrella indoors, and often make a point of walking under ladders, setting Maggie's teeth on edge. Maggie, on the other hand, was drawn to these old wives' tales like a magpie to a sparkly ring. She'd heard Hema, Nisha's mum, bang on about karma and not crossing on the stairs, and she'd been hooked. Even now, if she forgot to salute a single magpie, she lived in fear of a plane's frozen toilet waste falling from the sky and flattening her in the middle of Peckham Rye. As time passed, the initial anger at her birth mother shrank, and Maggie came to a decision she'd look for her when it felt right. Maybe Morag could provide answers to why her right thumb resembled a toe, while the left one was completely normal, and why her ridiculously wiry hair snapped off if she washed it more than once a week, but smelled like a sheep if she didn't. Yet Maggie's own life ultimately became so all-consuming, the mere thought of embarking on an intense, liminal journey with no guaranteed happy ending stalled her. Even when her mum and dad encouraged her, she still worried Morag might have a whole new life and a family who knew nothing of her existence. She didn't want to be that interloper barging in and bruising a perfect nuclear family. But the boiled-down reality was the tacit fear that Morag might want nothing to do with her at all. A second rejection would have been crushing. Nevertheless, by the time Iris was in the Grim Reaper's waiting room, a switch had flicked as if Maggie had been waiting for it the entire time. With both parents dead, there really was nothing standing in her way. Rejection now could feel no worse than this. The manila file was rather flimsy, and Maggie opened it, her hands shaking. The original birth certificate was present, along with all the information she already knew. Morag's age when she'd had her, Roxie's age. Roxie could scarcely put a mug in the dishwasher or pick up her 3-day knickers from under the bed with her balled-up socks. The idea of her making up bottles and rising before midday to do anything other than sit on her arse, mainlining TikTok, was laughable. Once more, Maggie tried not to blame Morag. Experience had taught Maggie that Morag had probably had to choose herself over her child. And what teenager wouldn't do that? After all, they were children themselves and prone to solipsism. But sometimes, if she dug a little deeper, that hurt she'd felt, age 6, when she'd discovered she wasn't who she thought she was, floated to the surface like a protective life raft, and she'd cling to it. Maggie picked out a never-seen-before photo of herself in a yellow shawl, eyes firmly closed against the world. Something slipped out onto the floor. A plastic birth tag with a name written on. Shona McDowell. The adoption certificate cited everyone's ages, occupations. Morag was a student. Maggie flipped open her laptop on the desk, the form already waiting. She filled in the missing details and pressed send before fear ground her to a standstill. She had lasted 43 years without knowing who Morag was, and was certain she could wait a few more months. There were more pressing matters to deal with. Endings were never easy, whether it be a family bag of crisps or the end of a relationship. The crumbs still went everywhere. "What are you watching?" Roxie and Adam sat squashed together on the small faux Louis XIV sofa, sharing a bag of posh tortilla chips left over from the wake. "Ozark." Maggie knew what it was. She just needed an opening. Fancy that. Needing an opening with your own family. "Are you both packed?" Maggie wanted to smack herself in the face for asking such inane questions, but couldn't stop talking. Roxie just rolled her eyes. Of course they'd not unpacked. They'd only come up for the funeral, and they were all driving back tomorrow morning, together. Once home the following evening, Adam slowly cleared away the remnants of their takeaway, dragging time out like a dead man walking, whilst Roxie retrieved her phone from her pocket. "No phone this evening, Rox," Maggie said. "What? We're not doing anything. Ash is FaceTiming in 10. "We're going to sit here a while longer." "I'm busy." "Rox," Adam said in a warning tone, like a teen whisperer. "But Dad—" "No, Mum's right. No phone for now. We need to chat." Playing to the gallery, Roxie made a meal out of shoving her phone back in her pocket. Sighing like a water buffalo, finished off the performance nicely. "What?" If defiance were a person, it would be Roxie. Adam sat next to her, like they had planned, with Maggie opposite, girding herself for the vitriol. She had pondered opening with a preamble, but she guessed she'd be derided for not getting to the point. "I'm really sorry, Roxie, but Dad and I are splitting up." Silence. Adam glanced sideways at an expressionless Roxie. "Do you understand, Roxie?" Maggie tried again. "That's it. No easing me in gently. No, it's not you, it's us. We're useless twats who can't pretend like everyone else's parents." "Roxie?" Maggie couldn't fucking win. "Roxie, we're sorry," Adam said. "Don't you mean Mum should be sorry? Do you want to split up, Dad?" Maggie had no idea where this strength of her own convictions originated. "I don't think anyone ever wants to split up, Roxie," Adam finally managed. "Otherwise, why would people get married? It just happens, So you and Mum just happened? Out of the blue? I'm not stupid. I can see what goes on. Look, Maggie began. No, this isn't even fair. You get what you want, and me and Dad have to put up with it. You've been like this ever since. Roxie's voice faded like someone jumping off a cliff, hovering momentarily before plunging headfirst into the abyss. Roxie, if you were little, I'd send you to your room. Now, Adam said quietly. Don't worry, I'm going. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping the floor like unoiled brakes. Maggie studied her hands until she could be sure Roxie was in her room. The slamming of the door in the maxed-out volume of The Cure, her sign to talk. That went well, you think? Adam sighed and shook his head. I was being facetious. Wrong time and place. She just needs time to adjust. I need to move my things into the spare room. Adam, I can move to the spare room. I said I would. No, I can't bear to be in that bed on my own. You keep it. He stood and walked up the stairs, while Maggie sat at the table, guts swilling with adrenaline, but also something else. Relief. Her phone pinged. How did it go? Nisha, checking in. Roxie's fuming. Adam's moving his things now. Are you okay? Shaky but okay. It's been a long time coming. Love you. I'll ring at the weekend, but if you need me before, let me know. Nisha was Maggie's chosen family, her personal curator who knew the parts of her Maggie had long since forgotten. She wished they lived nearer each other. Suddenly, all hell broke out upstairs. Dad, she should move in here, not you. Maggie ran up the stairs, two at a time, meeting a seething Roxie on the landing outside the spare room. Roxie, I want to sleep in here. Only because she made you. Dad, grow some. Roxie, stop. This is bad enough without you making judgments on stuff you know nothing about. Adam rarely lost his cool, but his twitching eye was winking disconcertingly. Roxie thundered back to her room and banged the door. A historic crack zigzagged from the frame all the way up to the ceiling. Years of Roxie's protests were evident everywhere. Most doors had various screw holes splattered around the handles, where repeated slamming had caused the handle to work loose, only to be reattached somewhere else. She's going to hate me forever. Maggie longed for Roxie's pudgy toddler hand in hers, but even that seemed like a dream now. I'm going to bed. I've had enough of today. Hope you get some sleep. That first week of living together apart was fraught with niceties. Suddenly there were cups of tea every 5 minutes, offers of dinners to be cooked from both parties, and you have the telly, no, you have the telly, waved like olive branches across the living room. Maggie almost joked they should split up more often, but stopped herself in time. Among the upheaval, the thought of a reply from Morag kept her adrenaline fermenting, bulwarking her from the reality of feeling rootless and alone, an orphan at 43, yet no different to a young girl who had lost both parents. Maggie had become adept at checking emails in meetings, utilising her well-worn poker face. By Friday, she'd given up and stopped looking every 5 minutes. As long as there was no news, there was still hope that Morag was out there somewhere, waiting to meet her. On Friday evening, at 5 o'clock, she made one final sweep of personal emails and was surprised by 2 messages. One from the adoption tracing agency and one from the estate agent in West Kirby. She stared for a whole minute, unable to decide which one to open first. She clicked the estate agent one. Iris's house had a buyer. There was no chain, and Crystal was hoping it would all complete like clockwork by the autumn. Maggie's childhood home. Going, gone. She felt unexpectedly usurped. Someone else would sleep in her apricot bedroom with the crack on the ceiling shaped like Italy's boot. Someone else was going to live next door to crazy Mr. May and Harriet, his tap-dancing wife. Someone else's car would drive daily over the barely visible blue E painted on the road by a drunk Mr. May, the remaining vestiges of glorious Everton daubed the night they won the 1985 European Cup. A warning and an order to repaint the road black by the policeman, luckily a Toffee supporter himself, saved Mr. May from a night in the cells. Her parents had dined out on the story for decades. Countless memories silted in the walls of her old home that she had to stop right there or she'd be trapped in her office forever. Maggie's cursor hovered over the other email. "Just do it," she muttered. Click. Chapter 3. Dear Ms. Pink, thank you for your recent inquiry about your adoption in 1979. I can confirm we found details of your birth mother, Morag McDowell, on file. I'm terribly sorry to inform you, but Morag died recently. The screen blurred into a white smudge, while questions chattered in an orderly line at the back of Maggie's mind. Shh, give me a minute. How could she be dead? Why hadn't Maggie tried sooner? What had she been afraid of? A surge of raw grief slammed into her, nothing protecting her from the onslaught now. She huddled over her desk, howling. As she heaved up great sobs, her shoulders shaking, disparate images flickered in her head. Her mum holding her hand as Maggie queued for ice cream on New Brighton prom. Mum reading the church mice books while she pointed at pictures. Mum crying into her cup of tea in the kitchen after Nana Hilton died. Mum and Dad insisting on driving her to her Durham University interview, subsequently splurging on fish and chips, then allowing her a glass of wine. Mum holding her after Kieran, her first boyfriend, dumped her, the pain unbearable. Her parents' faces when Maggie said she wasn't going to be a lawyer, that she was going to live in London, hundreds of miles away. She was never going to see Iris again. Ever. There was nothing for it but to come undone, something she found deeply unacceptable. But the tide was too strong to fight it. The difference from 10 years ago, when everything had spun out of control, was she knew she could ring-fence this surge. A soft knock on her office door startled her. Maggie, oh my God, what's happened? Are you okay? Isaiah, her assistant, ran to her side, but then had no idea how to deal with her. It's okay. I think I'm just having a moment about Mum. He patted her shoulder as she tried to wipe her face without a tissue. He pulled a pristine packet out of his back pocket, glad to have a solution. You like a Boy Scout? Always prepared? They taught us well. Why don't you go home? Don't worry about anything until Monday. I can look over the screenshots for the earthquake appeal. Maggie walked into the house to be greeted by music and chatting voices wafting down the stairs, evidence both Adam and Roxie were home. She closed the door quietly, wanting to be alone for a while longer. Too late. Floorboards squeaked on the landing, and Maggie actually prayed it was Adam rather than Roxie. Hey, you're home. Do we need to talk about estate agents? Maggie couldn't reply. Oh, shit. What's happened? Adam rushed from the bottom of the stairs to meet her on the sofa. Is it your mum? Which one? Adam frowned. I decided to look for Morag. Ah. And? She's dead. Shit. I'm so sorry. Maggie burst into tears again. Adam grabbed her hands. It was the most they'd touched for months. Can I do anything? I know it's awkward, but do you want a hug? Maggie was struck by how alienated they'd become, that he had to get permission to offer comfort. What did that say about her? She nodded. Adam drew her in as she bawled into his Nivea Sport armpit. Do you want to talk about it? Maggie pulled herself upright, rubbing her eyes. I got an email from the adoption tracing people. They said she was dead. Did they say anything else? I stopped reading after that. I couldn't face it. It was probably just niceties. Don't you want to check, just in case you missed something? What, like? Ta-da! Just kidding, she's really alive. No. What if there's someone else you can contact? Your dad? Oh, yeah. I suppose I should. Maggie grabbed her laptop out of her bag and opened the email, reading it out loud. Dear Ms. Pink, thank you for your recent inquiry about your adoption in 1979. I can confirm we found details of your birth mother, Morag McDowell, on file. I'm terribly sorry to inform you, but Morag died recently. Her sister Fiona had been asked by Morag to act in her place should you contact her posthumously. She has given the number of a solicitor in Inverness, should you want to get in touch, so the inquiry can proceed through a third party. You will find the number and contact at the end of the email. Adam had the grace not to say, I told you so. On Monday morning, after a weekend of imagined conversations and practice introductions, Maggie rang the solicitor as soon as she closed her office door. Hello, I wonder if you can help me. I need to speak to Catriona Watson. Can I ask what it's concerning? I was given this number and Miss Watson's name by the adoption tracing agency. My name is Margaret Pink. I think she may be expecting my call. Maggie was put on hold, accompanied by some unexpected jazz piano. She'd been anticipating Scottish folk music. She idly doodled an I on her notebook, ready to record any important details. Miss Pink, it's Catriona Watson. How may I help you? She knew exactly why Maggie had called, so this little charade was odd. Hello. I believe you were put in place as a go-between, should I ever get in touch about Morag McDowell? Ah, yes, her sister requested it on her behalf. I need to know what it is you want. Rude. If you'll excuse me, I don't really know what it is I want. I wanted to meet Morag, but have since found out she died. This was the point. Catriona could have interjected with, I'm sorry, that must be upsetting. Stony silence prevailed. Her sister, Fiona, made a point of standing in for Morag posthumously, and I wondered if that meant something. Fiona did indeed put herself in place at the request of Morag, I think to carry on Morag's dying wish. Which was? Catriona's obliqueness could certainly give Roxie a run for her money. I'm not at liberty to say. You do know I'm her daughter, that she gave away 43 years ago. Aye, it just seems a trifle puzzling that you would get in touch now, after so long, especially after she died. I didn't know she died, hence ringing here to find out about her. Maggie wasn't sure what transgression she'd committed to ruffle Catriona's feathers. OK, well, Fiona said it was to contact her if you got in touch. We just weren't expecting it after all this time. Did Fiona say she would be interested in speaking to me? Aye, she's given me permission to ask for your mobile number if you want her to call you. Of course. Maggie's tummy sank. What if Fiona was a battle axe too? After a few days of such ceaseless phone checking that it became a tic, Maggie finally received a text. Hello, it's Fiona, Morag's sister. I wondered when was a good time to ring you. Now. She'd squandered so much time already. Nonetheless, her ringtone still managed to startle her. Hello, is that Margaret? She had a very soft Scottish accent. It's Maggie, yes. Hello, Fiona. I can't believe I'm talking to you. Baby Shona. I found my name tag at Mum's house after her funeral a few weeks ago. That was when I realised I had another name. Aye, Morag was told you'd been named Margaret after the adoption. So sorry about your mum. They sent a picture of you with your parents after they took you home. Morag had always wanted to call you Shona, but Maggie's nice. When did Morag die? 8 weeks ago. Fiona gasped. I'm sorry, I still can't get used to it. Don't apologise, I understand completely. Mum has only been gone a month. Grief's a total rollercoaster. You poor thing, both mums gone. Did you wait until your parents had died before tracing Morag? I suppose so, yes. They never hid it from me, but I don't know, it always felt easier this way. I thought I'd a good few years, because Morag was so young. I've wasted all that time. Aye, the timing's altercock for sure. Listen, is there anything you want to ask me about Morag? Gosh, so many things, and in the same breath no idea. It's so overwhelming. I can only imagine. Where do you live, Maggie? London. Have you ever been to Scotland before? No way. I'm not coming, Roxie protested. Where are you going to stay then? Maggie could have chiselled the script in stone and read it out loud word for word. Every fucking time. Here, I'm 15. I can stay home alone. Not for a week, Maggie cried. Roxie, it's 7 days of your life. You're going to meet family you didn't know you had. It'll be interesting, if nothing else. Maggie thought Adam wasn't exactly selling it, possibly because the only gathering his family had were funerals. Or you can go and stay with Granny Slater in Watford. Adam's mum inhabited a world where she watched soaps from when she woke at 10 a.m. until she went to bed at 1 a.m., with 4 bottles of sherry sprinkled like fairy dust across the week. Last year, she'd sent Roxie a birthday card for a 10-year-old. She showed more interest in the dirt she scraped from her nails while she gorged on the fabricated lives of dubious characters from across the globe. Dad, I know you'd never make me go there. I can stay with Ash. Ash? I doubt it. We're into school holiday territory now. Ash's parents won't want to cater for an extra person morning, noon and night. You're going with your mother. Adam had to interview some precocious up-and-coming techno DJ at a Berlin festival and would be away 5 days. Maggie had managed to take compassionate leave with some extra days tagged on. Roxie would be with her a week, then Adam would come and rescue her. She even argued about that. I'm not a kid. I can get on a plane by myself. But Adam and Maggie were a united front. After Fiona had tentatively invited Maggie to Scotland, she suggested she stay in Inverness to give Roxie access to shops. I know what teenagers are like. It wasn't so long ago that I had 2 at home. They were to meet in Catriona's Inverness legal practice. It keeps everything above board. The week before, the trip elevated the atmosphere at home to Game of Thrones levels of insurrection, minus grisly carnage. If walls were living things, blood would have been hemorrhaging from them. You've stolen my civil liberties! Bang! A hairline crack slammed into existence on the kitchen wall. You're as bad as her now. I hate you both! Bang! Plaster fell from the already loose patch of ceiling below Roxie's bedroom door. I'm never speaking to either of you again. I'm going to divorce you! Bang! Books tumbled from the downstairs picture rail shelf, taking down an innocent vase and a key tray below. You're both fucking idiots! You deserve to die alone, eaten by cats! Bang! Roxie's door frame was shaken loose and at risk of falling off, a latticework of plaster cracks splintering outwards like a bomb blast. Maggie and Adam attempted to reprimand her, but it was impossible to reason with, let alone censure, someone who just didn't give a fuck. Maggie wasn't keen on Roxie accompanying her, but there was nowhere else she could go. She'd even considered postponing a few months, but she wasn't free of major work commitments again until October. Time felt like it was slipping away. She'd waited long enough. Maggie truly believed Roxie would come round, but she grossly underestimated the strength of pathological teenage brinkmanship. "Roxie, we're leaving," Adam called up the stairs on the Friday morning. The day was newly hatched. Honeyed light streamed in through the kitchen windows. Maggie held her coffee in a death grip, waiting for Roxie to appear on time. There had been no movement since Adam had woken her at 5, enough time to trowel on her pallor-inducing makeup. Maggie's foot tapped out an SOS on the floor, the table shaking in harmony. She and Adam both knew there was no point in trying to drag her out by force. Roxie would protest until the 11th hour, like a criminal futilely claiming their innocence on the steps to the gallows. All they could do was wait. Adam joined her at the table and topped up his coffee. "This is ridiculous. If you or I had acted like this when we were her age, we'd have been in the shit for years and clipped round the ear. I actually don't know what to do. I've tried asking her quietly how I can help, that I'm sorry this impacts her, but it's not like I'm sending her to a gulag. It's a jolly, admittedly for me, but she's acting like it's torture. She only responds to you, but you can't play that card now. My dad would have dragged me out by my hair and shoved me in the car with no clothes on. I remember once shouting at him I'd ring Childline, and he started dialing it for me. He was a hard wanker." Maggie smiled ruefully at the well-worn story of Adam's tough love household. In comparison, hers had been like an Enid Blyton novel. "Right, I'm going to get her." Just as Adam stood up, a door slammed above and insolent footsteps stomped down the stairs. Roxie appeared in the doorway, dressed entirely in black, her face expertly made up to look like a doll. Protest makeup, implying she was just a possession or some such diatribe. Right there, right then, Maggie didn't give a flying fuck. She just wanted to get on that plane. Chapter 4. Maggie's mum and dad had never visited Scotland, apart from to collect her. Therefore, she'd not been either. In hindsight, they were probably terrified Morag might spring from behind a shaggy Highland cow and steal Maggie away. Even though they had officially adopted her, the implicit fear was Morag would be hovering with a giant net and a bag of chocolate-covered raisins, Maggie's childhood snack du jour. Blood trumps water, after all. Well, it was supposed to. Maggie's own flesh and blood was doing a good impression of ghosting her. Not even chocolate could tease Roxie out of the doom-scrolling black hole she'd forcibly locked herself in. Maggie gave up and sat out the journey in her own bubble of anxiety. Inverness Airport looked as if it had been airdropped in the middle of a field, like a glorified milking shed. The subsequent car journey led them through verdant fields populated by cows and into the city centre 10 minutes away. It wasn't a conurbation like Liverpool or London, with sprawling suburbs gradually bleeding into the surrounding greenery. 1 minute you were in the countryside, the next you were absorbed into an abrupt cityscape. Maggie expected an ardent protest about the fact they had to share a room in their city centre hotel. Instead, she was met with weighted silence. She glanced at Roxie, her nose pressed against her phone, waiting for Maggie to finish unpacking. Roxie hadn't bothered. Maggie was certain an entire generation of kids would need counselling should they ever find themselves without adequate distraction for all of 2 minutes. Fuck knows how they would have coped in the 90s with Snake and a discman that jumped every time he breathed. Maggie had no idea what Roxie was gawking at. Some inane TikTok twat in a V-neck tight tee singing about baked beans, most likely. How was this okay? No wonder that tangerine tit had made it to the White House. Maggie procured an on-the-go Marks and Spencer meal deal so they didn't have to acknowledge the chasm between them. In a few hours, Maggie was going to meet her mother's sister, a genuine blood relative. She wanted to shake Roxie into understanding the enormity of it. But she was so far down the rabbit hole of my mum's a bitch, it seemed pointless. As the hour loomed, Maggie steered them away from the shops towards the lawyer's office, plonked between the shopping centre and a butcher's claiming to be purveyors of Inverness's most decorated, award-winning haggis. "Hello, you must be Margaret," the receptionist greeted them as they walked into the cosy waiting area. "Please take a seat. I'll just check with Catriona." Maggie sat gingerly on the edge of one of the comfy bucket chairs, ready to jump up at any given moment, while Roxie flopped into one as if she'd just hiked all the way from London. Maggie eyed the small coffee table loaded with magazines and leaflets. Family law, how to divorce amicably, will and probate, a guide. They needed to up their leaflet game. There wasn't one on how to deal with sulky teenagers. "Miss Pink, hello." A short woman with salt and pepper hair bustled in, wearing a smart navy suit, a whiff of school uniform about it, and a beige blouse the same colour as the hotel bathroom. She smiled and proffered her hand. A very different fish to the Catriona Maggie had been expecting. She wondered if she just had a terrible phone manner, or if in fact she'd initially been suspicious Maggie had her eye on the family silver. Maggie stood, wiping her palm on her leg before offering it up. "I'm Catriona. Fiona's waiting in my office." For the first time in years, Maggie wished Adam were here, holding her hand, pressing his thumb reassuringly into her palm. That had worked in the distant past, but this yearning now felt incidental. She pushed it away with a "nice to meet you," and turned to Roxie. "You coming?" Her daughter sighed like the very thought of standing was going to kill her. Maggie glanced at Catriona, who smirked. Either she was relating to the couched parental teenage tension, or for the millionth time she was thinking, thank fuck I don't have kids. Either way, Roxie stood up like her puppeteer had had a heart attack and slouched after them. Catriona strode towards her desk set in front of a French door leading to a small outside courtyard. A petite woman sat with her back to the door and, at the sound of everyone trooping in, stood up, almost pirouetting to face them. She stared at Maggie for a second, then her face split into a wide smile, tears glistening in her eyes. "Maggie!" She stepped forward to grab her hands. It was clear Fiona's hair had once been as vibrant as Maggie's own much-maligned auburn glory. As she clasped her icy hands, the tight knot of anxiety loitering in Maggie's throat edged up and dissolved into tears. "I'm sorry. That's my fault. I set you off." Fiona flustered around her pocket, searching for a tissue, and produced a pack before Catriona could reach over with the box from her desk. "Please, sit yourself down." Catriona ran and grabbed a spare chair by the door for Roxie. Roxie appeared to be as caught up in the drama as they all were, and for once sat without a fuss. Fiona glanced at Maggie again, almost holding her breath. "I'm sorry, Maggie. It's just you look so much like Morag. It's hard not to gape." "I'm so glad you said that," Catriona said in relief. "I've no idea what the protocol is for an event like this, but yes, you look so like Morag." "I don't know what she looked like, though," Maggie said, longing to be in on the act. "Let me show you." Fiona ferreted about in her handbag and retrieved her phone, scrolling before handing it over. "This is Morag 2 years ago at Country Fest, comparing the folk stage. Look through. You'll see a few of her." Maggie had previously declined Fiona's kind offer of sending photos before she travelled up. It felt a bit like Googling the menu before going to a restaurant, hence dampening the thrill of anticipation. But Maggie took the phone now and stared at the woman with the untamed red hair, obviously dyed to hold back the tide of time. Roxie stretched her neck to have a look, so Maggie shared the phone with her. "Wow, Mum, you really do look like her." Roxie breathed in disbelief. Maggie found it so discombobulating when Roxie behaved normal. Maggie studied Morag's face, her brimful of mischief eyes, the turn of her mouth as she confidently held the microphone, waving her arms towards an act just out of shot. She wore an exquisite purple African print jumpsuit and a glut of jangling multicoloured bangles. The red sequined feather earrings were identifiable to ornithologists everywhere. "She's got better teeth than you, though." Back of the net insult. Maggie almost congratulated her daughter and automatically pressed her hand against her lips, as if that could camouflage the gap between her front teeth. She loathed that gap, and for a time had mildly hated her parents for refusing to pay for a brace. They'd insisted it gave her face character, and she'd be grateful one day. She was still awaiting gratefulness, though Adam had said that was the first thing he noticed about her, apart from her beautiful singing voice. He'd said it was sexy. Maggie did get pregnant about 5 minutes after meeting him. When Maggie had spoken to Fiona on the phone, she had briefly explained parts of Morag's life and what she had been up to in the last few years before her untimely death at the hands of breast cancer. There had been too much to absorb that being here felt like the best option. Just seeing the pictures of Morag on stage, involved in music, had germinated